Hello everyone, this originally was going to be a video on a Yeston RX 460 and why it was a good card to still get in 2021. Boy, things change fast. This card is now selling for around £120 on eBay at the moment, which is insane since I purchased it about a year ago for £50. So it is a Yeston RX 460. 4GB version. It is a very simple affair. If you've not heard of Yeston, that's not a surprise. You've probably heard of Colourful. It's basically, they're not the same company of course, they're different companies, but it's the same kind of thing, as in it's a Chinese brand. You very rarely see it outside of China. As you can see by this box, it is all in Chinese. Very, very, very simple affair. And when I picked it up for £50, it was about £10 cheaper than other ones, so it was a bargain. Nothing wrong with it. Well, the only thing wrong with it, which I haven't resolved, is the lip at the top has come off. So, not that bothered about that. I'm guessing someone removed it because of probably lack of space in their case. So I haven't added it back on. In here, you don't get a lot. You get a Molex 2 PCI Express power. Quick installation guide from Yeston. All in Chinese, of course. Actually, no, it's inside. But pretty basic. Anyway, as I was saying, this is the RX 460 4GB version. It's a really good card, and when I bought it, the value was amazing. Of course, this card isn't going to be a powerhouse. Okay, well, let's pop this into a machine and let's have a look. We're going to be using an APU for the main CPU here, because it's the fastest CPU I currently have spare, which is a AMD 4750G. Amazing CPU, recently did a review on it up there. But let's pop it in and let's have a look, shall we? But before we begin, I need to point out this is actually an 8X card, not a 16X. Along the bottom of the card, there is no tracks for the 16X, so there's no way to remedy that, despite what the internet says. So this is an 8X card. Let's start off with 3D Mark, some simple benchmarks. In Time Spy we get 2005. In Firestrike we get 5651. In Night Raid we get 22,337. And in Wildlife we get 11,059. Which overall, that's a pretty good score across the board. It's very, I wouldn't even class it as mid-range now. It's slower than, let's say, the GTX 1650, but it is certainly a decent performing card at this point. And let's have a look at Passmark's 3D Mark, which it scores 4,431. So overall, not bad. Sticking with some synthetic benchmarks, let's look at Far Cry 5's built-in benchmark. We get an average of 33 FPS on Ultra at 1080p, so console performance. Let's be honest, that's not brilliant. Knock some of the settings down a bit, you should be able to get a more stable performance, maybe medium or dropping it down to 720p depending on what you're doing. But at 1080p, you're certainly getting console performance, which isn't bad. Here's another synthetic benchmark. Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 14 benchmarks. I like these two because they give a slightly different look on the performance of a card. So with the RX 460, this is on the lower settings for the benchmark for Final Fantasy 15. We score 3,727, which according to Square is playable, just about I suppose. It's a bit fast paced, Final Fantasy 15. Final Fantasy 14 though, as you would expect from a game that is now 11 years old, it scores pretty well. It scores 10,307, and this is on their standard laptop setting, which is pretty much what consoles use for their settings. So I know it varies a bit because I know the PS4 version has like a high quality mode for Pro, but that's kind of the setting they're using there, so perfectly playable. Looking at an older game, here we have Alien Isolation, classic game if you haven't played it. We get very good performance here, above 60 FPS all the time, so we've got a average of 86 FPS with a lower 62, so you can play this 60 FPS locked, no worries at all, so that's also very good. But of course that's an older game. Let's look at something much more modern. Here we have Doom Eternal, the latest Doom. This is the 4 gig card, so that's important to note because if you have the 2 gig card, you can only run this game on low. This is on Ultra, and we're getting round about 37 FPS, which isn't phenomenal performance, let's be honest. Knock some of the settings down a bit, and you don't get much of a boost, just because of the way things are with this game. It likes a lot of VRAM, and you can kind of tell. But knock a few things down and you should be able to get 40 FPS. It also has a built-in automatic scaling, so you can set your target FPS to 60 and it will up and down the graphical settings and resolution internally to meet your needs. I personally think it looks terrible, but if you have to have that 60 FPS experience, this card can do it if you enable that. Sticking with more modern games, here is Metro Exodus, the latest Metro game. Brilliant series, once again if you haven't played it, pick it up. On the extreme setting, we're only getting 21 FPS average, which is, let's be honest, almost like slideshow at that point, it's terrible. But on medium, so dropping it down a bit, we get a good 47 FPS average. Of course not 60 FPS locked, and we are talking console kind of performance here, but more than playable for a game like this. So that's good. Sticking with modern games, let's have a look at Baldur's Gate 3. This game is in early access, so the performance isn't exact. I would expect it to improve over time, and it seems to have with the latest update just a little bit. On Ultra, it's pretty playable. You've got 37 FPS, which is acceptable for a game like this because it's not that fast paced. It's a turn-based game after all. But knocking the settings down to, let's say, like medium or even very low. I mean, medium you get an average of 52, and on very low you can get an average of 63. So it's playable, but very low looks absolutely awful. So play on Ultra or high, or in all fairness even medium, and you're going to get a reasonably smooth experience. Maybe cap it to 30 FPS if you want, like, don't want dips and whatever. But yeah, it's very good. Though I have noticed with this card, and it's still doing it in the latest version, on Ultra there are some very big dips when textures are loading in for whatever reason. Might be just unoptimized textures, but I get this with the RX 460, the RX 480, and the 560 and the 580, so it's definitely an AMD issue, which is strange. Looking at something a little older, but a little bit more intense, here is Vermintide II. It's on the highest settings, 1080p again. We're getting an average of 29 FPS, which when you consider everything that's going on, that's not bad. You need to remember this is running on a very fast CPU, so your mileage may vary with this game. But knocking the settings down, you can get into the 40s without too much hassle. Moving on to Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the latest Tomb Raider game. On the maximum settings, we're getting 28 FPS, so that's pretty bad. Knock the settings down a bit, you can get into the low 40s, so it really is a console experience here. Unfortunately, there's no like real-time scaling going on, so you can't like have a slightly lower internal resolution. Well, if it has, I haven't found it. So you're kind of stuck with the console performance here, so you're not going to be getting 60 FPS in this game from what I can tell. Now, one of the games I've been enjoying playing recently, Apex Legends, and I know it's getting a lot of views at the moment, so there was a performance dip at the end of Season 7, and it seems to have persisted through to Season 8. I don't know what they've done, but round about the end of Season 7, the last couple of weeks, the performance of this card dropped drastically. So I'm not entirely sure what happened. It doesn't seem to be the map Maybe it was something they changed internally, I'm not entirely sure. But on the maximum details, you're getting about 34 FPS average, and on the minimum details, when you just knock everything down, you get about 56. So you're not going to be getting 60 FPS all the time here, at all. Now let's try something like Fortnite. You're not going to be running this on Epic at 100% resolution. It does struggle, and that's what just Fortnite now, because it's so bloated, it struggles. You can run it on medium, 60%, no problem at all, and on low, it runs absolutely perfect. But on the high to max, you're going to struggle. But once again, and a game I got requested to look at for this particular card, here is Call of Duty Warzone. Please note, I haven't played a Call of Duty game in a very long time. But as you can see here, the performance is pretty playable. We're getting about 48 FPS average, and this is with a game against bots, so it's not exactly accurate really, but it's close enough. And everything is on low, but 100% resolution, so it's not bad. I mean, some settings are turned on, so there is some leeway here to turn some things off to get 60 FPS. So this game is certainly playable on this card with this CPU. So if you want to play Call of Duty Warzone and have an RX 460, go ahead. No benchmark would be complete without good old Crysis. Bit of a joke these days now, isn't it really? But let's have a look. On high with no anti-aliasing, we get a good 80 FPS. So it can be played. But let's whack all the settings up to high. We're getting 37 FPS, which not really playable for this game. So if you adjust the anti-aliasing a bit, tweak a few settings down, you can get a 60 FPS performance, no problem at all. So it is playable, just not on the highest settings, which, to be honest, is not a shock. Well, there we have it really. The RX 460, very simple affair. Not the lowest power card in the world. It gets a bit warm, but yeah, works very well. It's very, very mid-range is what I'd call it. And what I originally was going to say in this conclusion was, it's an absolute bargain of a card at the moment. Grab it. But since we are now in, the media calls it Chipageddon, the prices have gone up quite substantially. I could probably resell this card for over twice of what I paid for it originally, which is insane, since it's now a very old card and it's not worth the prices people are paying for it. So I would actually recommend, if you're desperate for a card that isn't onboard graphics, is grab a GTX 750 Ti. I know it's only a 2 gig card, but those seem to be slightly better priced than this. Though I have seen a few of these 2 gig versions of this card going for about a similar price to that card, and they are comparable. So I would go grab that. In terms of new cards, there isn't anything out there, let's be honest. The only card you really get your hands on now is a GT 1030, which is much slower than this card. Not by a massive amount, but it's definitely slower. And once again, it's a 2 gig card, so you're better off buying a GTX 750 Ti second hand. But give it a few weeks, maybe a few months, for things to settle down. And I suspect this card will drop in price again. At which point, in 2021, I can see this card still holding its own for at least another 12 months. Of course, you're not going to be running on maximum details, but if you can pick up the 4 gig version, you should be fine for at least another 12 months in terms of games. You might have to knock the resolution down a bit and maybe go on lower settings, but for what potentially, when I bought it, a £50 card, you can't really complain. So that's all I really wanted to say about this card today. It was going to be a bit more in depth, but I might revisit this later once prices have settled down a bit. But for now, thank you for watching. Any comments or questions, leave a comment below. Like or dislike the video. Feedback's always great. And I will see you in the next one. So, goodbye.